Eric.
Homer.
This is going to be one of their episodes. When we last had these guests on, we learned how to bridge the gap. We learned about the bag of worms lurking underneath us all. And today, we're going to challenge some conventional logic in the fitness space. Because as we know, no one enters the fitness space for the wrong reasons, Eric. No one develops any negative habits that kind of spiral out of control. Everyone has a positive relationship with themselves, with the food that they eat, and with each other. And thus, this is basically just a redundant conversation for the masses that we need to have just because we need to have it.
We all get the abs or we all get the booties, and therefore we also all get the guy or gal, whatever our preference is, or just the car. That's also a large part of it. And most importantly, we get the happiness. Even though sometimes those smiles don't extend past the mouth up into the eyes, and you just kind of see a deadness in those eyes. Yeah. But I've been taught by Instagram that's what real happiness looks like.
No.
So on that topic, I am extremely excited, proud, privileged to have two 4-Peats on, Doctors Fundaro and House are on, which Fundaro. See, 4th time, still can't pronounce your name.
Oh no,
that's cool.
I had to write it out. I wrote it out before, so I wouldn't screw it up, and I still might screw it up. I'm worried I might screw it up. Fun, and then I wrote the word dare. Oh,
yeah, it's so Fundaro.
Yeah, that's exactly. That's how I'm like. It's the word fun, and I'm like, dare you not to have fun, Fundaro.
You can't, because when you got Gabby, you always have fun, folks. Where was I? Yes, 4-Peats, Dr. Ben House, Dr. Gabrielle Fundaro, and you have to pronounce it like that from now on till the end of time. And we've got a really cool conversation to have with two people who I love, never follow along any singular party line. They're hardwired biologically with critical thinking, folks. No hard work has gone into their achievements. It's all hardwired biology. No, I'm just kidding. I realize as I say what I say, I don't mean what I say, but I said it, so it's done. But we've got these folks on, and they are both fantastic content creators, and they've had some really engaging conversations that I wanted to bring to the listeners. And I think a good inception point was it started with the post that you made, Gabby, where you pointed out that if you approach weight loss for potentially the wrong reasons, quote unquote wrong, with the, let's say, less than ideal methods, the odds, and I think that's what we're going to frame this as, is how do we play the odds in our favor? The odds are more likely, perhaps, that you're going to come away with a beautiful eating disorder and maybe some body image issues to go with it, rather than actually sustaining that weight loss long term. And if that isn't a bomb of truth, perhaps, depending on the odds ratios and P values, I don't know what is. So what came of that? And what was, and first off, did I accurately describe that post? And then what blossomed, what beautiful conversations have blossomed out of that?
Yes, absolutely. That was a concise and accurate summary. And it was essentially what I was trying to point out was that the cost to benefit ratio of intentional weight loss is not consistent across all groups. And quite often when we're having conversations about the risks of intentional weight loss and the benefits and the purpose, that we're usually kind of discussing one group, but also simultaneously lumping everyone into it. You know, when we're trying to say that like intentional weight loss is always bad, or the methods that we're using are always disordered, or that it can always be a great idea for anyone because it improves certain health metrics, that we really have to look at exactly who we're talking about and how they're going about doing it. And the other side of that was a call for more transparency in the industry about the cost to benefit ratio when we're talking about like general pop fitness enthusiasts who are already metabolically healthy and active and might not have much to gain from a physical health perspective in pursuing weight loss. And so I think it's important that, when we're having discussions about whether intentional weight loss or dieting are appropriate for someone, that we have to think about who that person is, and that we also have to think about this, from like a public health standpoint, but importantly from a person centered standpoint, that, we need to be compassionate and understanding and empathetic when we're face to face with a person, regardless of their body size. So that was a lot. And then Ben had reached out, and I have the utmost respect for him and everything that he puts out. I think that he also does a fantastic job of playing to the middle, of like looking at both sides and providing a very balanced perspective with all the nuance and context that these topics deserve. And we were talking a little bit about the potential benefits of intentional weight loss for metabolic health. I was like, yeah, I'm totally on board with that. And also, this post is not just talking about people with overweight or obesity. It's talking about just people in general, and that the beliefs that they have about being smaller, and that the methods that they use and what they're willing to risk, that it's really about that. It's really about how is the fitness space marketing weight loss, and how we can improve the transparency and thereby improve potentially the safety of that pursuit. And then and then he was like, had this great idea, let's go on the podcast.
No, and we're honored to have to be able to provide a space for that conversation, because I think even among the cult, and I mean no disrespect to them, because this is a complex topic, I think it's easy to get mired into some assumptions and some blind spots we don't even realize we have when we discuss this. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that a lot of people in the evidence-based fitness community, if we want to call it that, are themselves trainers, or are trying to do things that are ostensibly going to have a positive impact on people. For trainers, we know that regardless of maybe why we got into it, so many of our potential clients come to us seeking weight loss. And we have done so much homework, put in so much time and effort, and many times in our own personal stories have had success from weight loss, or at least that's been a part of what's gone on for us, or maybe at least body composition change. And it is hard not to take statements about like that, even yours, which I think is a much more nuanced, reasonable statement about odds ratios and includes the approach taken and for whom. It's hard not to feel attacked, I'll say, or at least have someone question the relevance of the entire thing that you've made your career. And I think that generally that kind of almost fear-like response, it narrows the view so that we start talking about what keeps us relevant. What makes all my life still not have a negative impact. And yeah, it's not even just relevance. It's like, oh my God, is it perhaps some of the things I've done have had not only a neutral or, non-existent effect, but perhaps made it worse. However, I would put forth to everyone listening, if that was your knee-jerk reaction to sometimes when you see some of the weight neutral stuff, or maybe even not even weight neutral, but the more fatalistic narratives about the possibility of successful weight loss, or maybe even the more extreme, all intentional dieting is disordered eating. I think if you have a really extreme reaction to that, my advice would be to look inward and assess that you might be hearing something that they might not be saying, and which is driving your reaction. So anyway, I wanted to kind of inject that preamble just a little bit, just so that we can all hopefully start with calming our inner sides, because that's a very normal reaction if you're someone in the fight, and just being able to kind of listen, critically think, objectively view this, and hear some of these counterpoints. And I do want to emphasize again, your post, Gabby, it was about what are the intentions behind your weight loss? Who are you? What things do you have going into that journey, and as far as risks, beliefs, and underlying physiology? And then what approach do you take? And I think that is the critical nuance, which is often lost.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, it's that I'm, and I want to make it clear that I'm not only a weight neutral coach. I do help people who want to utilize macro counting and want to pursue intentional weight loss. So it's not about taking sort of abstinence only approach. It's just about ensuring that people are making informed decisions, and that you as a coach have a number of tools in your belt so that you can help a wide variety of people meet a wide variety of goals in the way that's best suited for them. And for some people, a weight neutral approach will be more appropriate. So it's not necessarily about like picking sides or saying one is always better than the other. It's about what is the best approach for the person in front of you. And that takes an understanding of both sides of the kind of debate and an understanding of the person.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I love talking to Gabby. I love having text conversations with her because she thinks in a different way than I do. And I think we both have different passions and proclivities. And so I'm very objective. And so when I see this, I want to know like what does what and what's the effect size and who. That's how my mind works. I want to what is this thing? What does it do and for whom? And so where I'm useful in this conversation is metabolic health. Like when we get into subjective psychology, I'm not as useful because that is not as it's a little bit dirtier of a science, if excuse my words, but it's more subjective. And so where I think that we as fitness enthusiasts, coaches, we have to really understand the word health. Because the word health has so many different types of meanings. And I think when most people are using the word health, they are using the term, they're thinking about metabolic health on the gram. And so could weight loss improve your metabolic health? That all depends on where you are. And this is the really, really, really big thing because, and this is a really, really, it's an enormous thing. From a public health standpoint, we have 88 million people in the United States who have prediabetes. Is that the right word? Have prediabetes? I love what Gabby says. Like we're so worried about stepping on landmines sometime in this space that we can't actually have conversations. So people have blood sugar values at one point in time that are over a line in the sand. And for those individuals, 88 million people, 70% of those people may progress to type 2 diabetes over their life. 1 in 2 minorities born after 2000 may get type 2 diabetes in their lifetime. This is a huge deal. And we want to know what tools could be useful. And one of the biggest things that hit me in the last few days is I went back and looked at some of our presentations because I've mined all of this research, and Gabby knows that. And what I looked at, and even the authors looked at it this way: weight neutral approach did not change metabolic health markers over a 2-year span. But you know what they didn't do? They didn't go up. So I think we need to start thinking about like what are the interventions that arrest people in metabolically healthy states. Because one of the things that people in maybe we'll call them right of center, the thing that they'll do to strawman the argument is they'll pull Bell's paper and they'll say, okay, if you're metabolically healthy, if you have MHO, whatever that is, you're still at a 4 times greater risk of type 2 diabetes in a prospective observational research. Like if we follow them over time for 10 years, they still have this increased risk of type 2 diabetes, even if they are metabolically healthy and obese. And we can argue about how we define that. But that's observational research. There's no intervention there. I would expect that to happen. We now have, so this is really, really cool because I think weight neutral approaches can potentially arrest someone in that metabolically, like that weird middle ground. And that's if we think about it, that is the majority of humans that we are probably talking to. That, like, if we think about that behavior change spectrum, like these individuals, they're the people that we want to move to do something. And just exercise alone can probably do it. And so this is by having the conversations on the extremes, we really lose the conversation that we need to be having with the majority of individuals.
Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned you get different repeated trutheisms whether you encounter people on that right or left of center. That's a great one that you used as an example, using an observational study to build up a point when there actually is better data. The same thing you see on the other side, 95% of attempts at weight loss fail. That's not completely false data. I actually am aware of some observational research that shows that. But then if you look at the look ahead interventional data, you see much better numbers. Like I want to say it's 40% at 8 years if they had regular checkups were able to maintain at least 5% of their initial weight loss. That could be an inaccurate remembering of that statistic, but I remember it being, and that's not great, by the way, but it's a lot better than 95% just fail. So I think that's quite interesting.
8 years that these individuals were in the study, and it's another metric. Their hemoglobin A1C did not go up. So we automatically think of not going down as a loss here, but I think we need to frame it as a entirely different thing, in that the average American gains 1 to 2 pounds per year. And you could make the argument that over 50% of that may come in the next 6 weeks, that may come from this holiday season. And just preventing that slow increase, that may be the biggest thing from a population dynamic.
It's very interesting.
And I think that the information that we have about the effects of intentional weight loss, and even in these long-term studies, like the percent net weight loss that's maintained is relatively small, somewhere between 3 to 7%. You're looking at like that 5 to, I think at 8 years, they had maintained 5%. So that gives us, I think, a more realistic set of expectations. It could be that 100% of diets fail by the time we look out at 20 years. We don't know that, but does that part really matter when we're looking at what is realistically achievable for a person that also leads to clinically relevant outcomes and can ostensibly be done with minimal risk and harm to that person? Probably a 5% weight loss, achieved slowly and then maintained is on the end of the spectrum that would be considered safe and potentially even accidental. And so when we're talking about weight neutral approaches, I think we often are thinking about them as weight maintenance approaches, but that's not necessarily the case. It's just that we haven't looked at weight as a thing that we want to modify on purpose. But when we look at the behavior change and we look at the social support, those changes could have metabolic health effects, even minimal. They could potentially lead to weight change that's just not on purpose. Imagine that a person has been emotionally eating, they feel disconnected from their social circle, they haven't been getting out and moving around or walking their dog, they just kind of feel bummed out. And rather than them saying, I'm going to start a new diet on January 1st, they say, I'm going to start calling my sister. I'm going to start taking my dog for a walk every day. And I'm going to start eating some vegetables. Feels a lot better. And perhaps they do lose some body weight. So the weight neutral approaches aren't anti-weight loss. They're just focused on behaviors rather than weight as an outcome. Now, there's more to the social movement associated with weight neutral approaches, but I've kind of couched these as universally applicable skills. Things like being able to discern hunger and fullness and appetite and cravings. Is it something that is a head hunger, to be emotional, a heart hunger? What are you really craving? Are you craving an experience? Are you craving connection? You have an emotional need that you're trying to meet with food. Being able to determine what your needs actually are and then meeting them more effectively I think I can probably say with confidence that improves some metric of health when we're looking at the whole spectrum of health from a mental, physical, social, and sort of purposeful semiotic standpoint. That perhaps we can help people improve their health in that way. And not throw out intentional weight loss for the people for whom it's appropriate and not harmful.
Makes a lot of sense.
I'll jump in there because I think that the thing that that I pull out from all of this is the strategies and behaviors that you're talking about are like, I've made these big lists because of how I like lists. I like to put things in categories, right? I'm reductionistic. And so I make the lists of like what improves body composition. And then I make the list of like what improves body image. What are the clues? We don't have a ton of research, but what is related to long-term weight loss success? And guess what? There's a lot of strategies in there that are very cohesive. We're talking about like self-advocacy for physical activity, eating more real food. So I think we're also at this point where we probably all agree way more than we disagree, and we don't even know. And that's something that's really, really important to me. And what I've taken away is like, from a tool-based perspective, what in the active fat loss phase, like what are the tools that are really, really important for active fat loss that we don't need? And so how can we get active in a general population? Like bodybuilding, completely different thing. You're going to have to do things that are different. You're going to essential body fat ranges. It's a sport. But for the general population, what are the tools that are going to get you weight loss? Because 80% of people who are coming to you, if you're listening to this and you're a coach, 80% of them will have physical appearance as a motivation. I don't not want people to have that. I'm not going to be Jennifer Aniston in the breakup. Like, I understand that you have wants. But I think that we can use tools that are going to be more useful for longer periods of time. Mm-hmm. And I'm even at the point right now, this will boggle people's minds. I'm even at the point where I would probably rather use prepackaged, pre-portioned health meals and just focus on those other skills. And I actually don't want people. I don't want you to have a PhD in the numbers of nutrition. I don't want you to have my brain. I don't want it for you. And so like I would use a different tool. And this is really, really, really cool because this is exactly what the new preview study did, is they essentially used a product like that for active weight loss. And then they started working on the behaviors in the background. And I think if we start thinking like that, because I think that, Gabby, correct me if I'm wrong, like the downsides of a lot of this are essentially like watching food. And that may not be necessary for the general population. And they may not need to be the watcher in the counter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When we look at a lot of the messaging on Instagram is obviously simplified, sometimes to the point of just being inaccurate. So they'll say like, macro counting is disordered. Well, not necessarily. It's not the behavior itself. Some behaviors excluded, but macro counting or calorie counting in and of itself, we have to look at the cognition behind it. We have to look at whether it's rule driven, whether it's compulsory, whether a person feels fear or anxiety when they're not using macros. Those are some significant red flags. And so if a person wants to pursue weight loss and they're utilizing something and they're utilizing macros, and another person who is using them in a different way with none of that sort of like predisposition, they're going to look at that person and say, well, macros work for me. They're fine. I don't see how they're disordered. And then another group might say, no, this is disordering because it's compulsory and rule driven. So it's not necessarily behavior. It's what's behind that. So if we expand our toolbox to say, hey, if you think macros are cool and it's a way to learn a little bit, that's great. Or maybe we just look at like, what are the functional sort of components of food? What does protein do for you? That's great too. Maybe we look at hand size estimates. We use the hunger scale. So as you pointed out, it's about like helping people find the most like the easiest way to the behaviors that they want to sustain long term, but also about helping them figure out like, why do they want to reach that goal? Is that really going to give them what they think it's going to give them? Because that can help people kind of determine, hey, do I want to get abs because I want a better relationship with my partner? Do I feel like I need to be smaller so that I can be respected at my job? Like the aesthetic reasons, again, not universally disordered, but it's just like keeping that awareness, like what's behind this for you? And then maybe also tying in, some potential health benefits, like if that's the case for a person. Health related goals seem to be more associated with successful weight loss and weight loss maintenance. And we might also see less of that body image disturbance that or body dissatisfaction that can also be a risk factor for developing an eating pathology. So, again, we have to be careful about saying that, like, if you lose weight, your body image will guaranteed to improve. Like, no, not necessarily.
Could get worse.
So
you could get worse.
Exactly. And so yeah, it's about like, again, finding the safest way to do it and focusing on the habits, and then being very realistic about like the amount of weight loss that a person can actually achieve and maintain long term, which might be small. And I think that that's where the argument against intentional weight loss comes in and says, like, what's, knowing that all that we do about the potential risks of intentional weight loss, and the rates of maintaining it are so abysmal. Like, why would we recommend that people do that? And I think that that's valid for a group of people, that like maybe we shouldn't recommend that people do that. Not everybody anyway, and then we can also say there's, weight neutral approaches that could be effective in many other ways, and that people might not need to count anything at all, even for intentional weight loss, whereas that's where those kind of like universal skills come in. So yeah, Ben, I agree. It's like we have so much more in common than I think we actually realize.
It seems like a lot of the talking across one another also comes down to conflating weight loss as a outcome or an intervention. Like it's not necessarily a method. There are, I think, like when you get people who get defensive about it, in their mind, they're defending the what are ostensibly the best methods to achieve reasonable, steady, healthy weight loss with the right coaching and mindset behind it. And sometimes on the other side, weight loss is strawmanned as if you've gotten weight loss, it was because of intentional dieting, and that's always bad. So and again, both of like if weight loss is an outcome, not a method, then enables you to have that discussion with a little more nuance, which I think is often just kind of missed when you listen to people talking about this, at least on one side of the conversation.
It's outcome based. And I think we're always going to it always gets weird when we're outcome based, because you have to drill down into those processes that got you the outcome. And so I'm going to get a lot of heat because I just, I threw some shade at macros. I have nothing against macros, but what is the skill that they got from that? What did they get from that experience? If the only thing that they got is an addiction to their phone and MyFitnessPal and a crowdsourced app that is inaccurate, we got a problem. Macro factor. Yeah. Sorry. That's great.
This is 2021, guys.
Yeah, folks. No one gets their eating disorders from MyFitnessPal. They get it from Stronger by Science. You heard it here.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ben.
If we think about what is the skill that someone is actually getting from this, then it becomes a lot more interesting to me than an addiction to 3 numbers and maybe fiber. Because if you get and Eric, you've talked about this a lot, is what are the things that people usually trip on? I'm eating more than I thought I was. There's probably a little bit more fat in my diet, and I'm not eating enough protein. Is there a way that we could have do they need that tool to trip on that? But could the tripping be useful? I think yes. But how many weeks do you need to trip on it? You don't need years to trip on that. And so I think it's, as we get more tools, I think we become less dangerous. And then this is only complex really on the group level. On the individual level, it's not that complex. It's what are your objective markers of health? I don't care about your BMI. I don't care about your I don't care about your body composition. What are your objective measures of health? Like, what's your hemoglobin A1C? What's your fasting triglycerides? Like, if we're going to talk about health, let's actually talk about health, not a proximate thing that has a lot of baggage if people don't know about it. Like these things have a lot of baggage historically. So let's actually talk about health metrics if we're going to talk about health. And then we can talk about, is weight loss going to objectively improve your health? And the answer for the majority of Americans, given the state of our metabolic health in the West, and you could take this out into Europe and South America right now, is yes, objective weight loss would probably improve the metabolic health of 91% of people in the United States. What percentage of the cult listeners would it improve? I don't know. It'd probably be really low, to be honest. Like I think that if you're really metabolically flexible already, losing weight is not probably going to make you healthier. And if your goal is to like win the health Olympics and have your continuous glucose monitor never go over 100, like we're probably not going to be friends. But I understand that kind of ideology. But I think that Gabby would take that. You're really focused on the health of one aspect of health. And because you're so hyper-focused on that metabolic aspect of health, you're probably losing a lot of the other nourishment. And I'm going to use the word nourishment there because we have a 2-year-old. And I will tell you that to nourish that baby human, it is not just food. There are so many other things that human needs. And we're all that human to a certain extent grown up. And as someone who's super analytical, I never got that until I realized that, this baby it's not food. Food isn't just fuel for her. She needs to be held. She needs all these other things. So that's kind of, that's where I'm at with if we're going to talk about health, let's actually talk about health and not conflate it with having abs and body composition, because 99% of the time going from 15% body fat if you're a male to 9%, you probably got it objectively, maybe you got a little bit more metabolically healthy, but you got probably hormonally less healthy. And then I'll just be straight up, females, we got no idea. Like those body fat percentage numbers that I just threw out for males, throw them out. Like DeSosa's paper just kind of completely blew that up. And because I use DeSosa's refuel paper, I'm like, if people don't know what it is, it's open access, go look at it. These are females with amenorrhea or oligomenorrhea, and their incoming body composition will, if people trip on this, it's like 24, and every one of those females is already amenorrheic. And so I don't think we can have those same kinds of lines in the sand with females that we have in males. And I don't even know that we can have in males, if I'm completely honest, because it probably is relational to where you were.
Yeah, I think if you look at the data on LH pulsatility in women and quote unquote hormonal health, it seems a lot more tied to energy availability than necessarily body fat. And I wouldn't be surprised if that is not also the case in men. It's just they share so much variance, right? Any dude who's maintaining 9% body, not any dude, most dudes maintaining 9% body fat have low energy availability, right? You're basically trading a libido for a lot of interest in pizza is essentially what you've done. So it's health neutral. You're just, I'm less interested in procreating, more interested in having almost that kind of same attraction to certain food items. Yeah, I've been there. Yeah, it's good times. Yeah.
So what you're really, I think, to kind of like potentially sum up a little bit and shore up some of what we pointed out, a lot of the confusion and arguing probably stems from conflating dieting with weight loss and conflating weight loss with health, happiness, achievement, success, add to the list of awesome things. So that when people are saying diets don't work, they might be meaning something different from weight loss doesn't improve health in certain people, and then when people say like, dieting is disordered, it might be that they're talking about the people who are already at a low body fat level and are using, strict means to achieve a lower body fat level. And what we could say is that for some individuals with overweight or obesity, there are safe or best practices means of helping them to achieve a lower body weight, lower body fat, and improve their metabolic health. We don't have to do that with macro counting. We can help them to achieve or establish new habits that may look like weight neutral habits. It's just that they know that they want to lose weight. And that when people so we can kind of look at that like intentional weight loss in pursuit of health. And then when we're looking at weight loss that is aesthetic or cosmetic weight loss, that's probably the riskier, that group is probably at greater risk. But when we look at marketing for weight loss, it's pretty much marketed to everyone in the same way. Like losing weight is just going to make you a better person. An after picture is better than the before picture. And that if you have overweight or obesity, you have some responsibility to not be that way. And that's where we get into people's beliefs about body fat and weight regain, and that weight loss starts to mean something more than just lower body fat. It says something about that person's character. So we start to perceive people in a specific way, and that creates a lot of, shame and fear around weight regain. And that's the sort of social aspect of the anti-diet movement, is that they're trying to challenge weight stigma and people's beliefs about body fat. Because even though weight stigma is going to predominantly affect people in larger bodies, it affects everyone. Because women and men in all bodies will feel a certain way if they regain their weight. And that if you go to a doctor and he assumes that you're healthy because you're of a normal weight, but you're really sick, or you go to him and you're in a large body and he says you just need to lose weight and you're really sick, that in both cases you have received substandard care because of society's beliefs about body size. And that is how we sell weight loss. That's how we sell transformations. That's why it's risky to be transparent about it. And it's maybe how some companies maintain repeat customers, because they send this message that, yes, weight loss is achievable. If you're a successful, determined person, you're going to achieve it and you're going to maintain it long term. And if you don't, you've probably done something wrong. And so you should try again this other way that will definitely work for you, because that other way didn't, but our way will. And that when you lose weight, you will be a happier person. People will like you more. You'll be more fun at parties. So hopefully that helps. A lot of times
they don't even change. The other crazy thing is they don't even change. You didn't do the thing, to bring it back to the other episode, you didn't do the thing hard enough. They don't even change the tool. They just do the same thing harder.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, it's what the definition of insanity is, redoing the same thing and expecting a different result. And so the weight neutral approach, and yes, we have that the social aspect can't entirely be separated from the weight neutral approach, because it does call on us to change our beliefs about body fatness and to even potentially move toward a place of acceptance to the person in front of us who is in a large body. And for us to check in and ask, did this person ask for my advice on what they should do about their body size or metabolic health? And if not, then we respect their bodily autonomy to let them do their thing, just like we do with other people who make decisions about their bodies that we might not agree with.
I love it. I think up to this point in this podcast, we've done a really good job with helping people understand where the talking across one another occurs. And we've helped people understand some of the nuances of this. I think for those who are now better, well, hopefully everyone better understands this topic, it begs the question now, well, we still got to do something. Because going back to some of the statistics that you talked about, Ben, we have some health issues, public health issues, and we know that there is risk at simply kind of yelling about them and saying it needs to change and we need to get this outcome, weight loss, because that'll result in better health. Now we understand why we can't just do that. So what do we do?
There's risk in just telling people they are overweight or obese.
Mm-hmm.
There's especially children, because children think just labeling a child or an adolescent as overweight or obese generally has the opposite effect of what we think it is going to have. So not only is it weight stigma that is harmful, it's potentially harmful just to tell kids that they are obese, because they think of it as I am obese, because the English, they think it,
it's safe, let it stop.
I am. I am, right? So in English, we do not have an impermanent form of to be. I lived in a Spanish-speaking country. I speak Spanish fairly well. That's estar. And don't say it like that, though.
It's like it's Fred Astaire's brother, Fred Astaire.
Estoy hablando con mis amigos in Costa Rica, and I was talking to my friends in Costa Rica about what is, because you have this like impermanent form of to be. What do you use that for obesity? What is it? And they use like él tiene obesidad. So they will use he has obesity. So they still, even though they have the impermanent form of to be, they could use like él está obeso. They don't use it. They still use this person has obesity. So they still use the disease context. So I find that interesting.
It's like, how many years do you have, for your age? Yeah.
And so even this is where things get weird, because we've had a lot of fear-based sells on obesity. And I in the last 2 years, I don't know how many times I've heard like obesity, COVID yelling. And so this is a nuanced topic inside of public health and healthcare. I am not a public policy expert. I'm not a public health expert, but this is whether fear-based cells are actually useful in public health is argued inside of that sphere. I would argue against using fear-based obesity cells. And if you're going to use a fear-based cell, make it diabetes, and you better have a coping strategy on top of that. So that you don't just sell fear, you actually, all right, these are the things that could potentially move the needle. Here's the tools, right? Here's where you could seek help. And one of the things that I'm just going to be super real. Like everyone on this call, if you're a dude, I don't care if you're what dude, non-binary, female, doesn't matter to me. Wherever you are, you've probably pinched some fat on your body. You've pinched some fat and you haven't liked it. I know I pinched fat. I know all of this stuff. I've read Come As You Are. I've talked to therapists, and I pinch fat on my body. I'm like, I don't like that. What is that sub-Q fat right there?
I have a certification in pinching fat. I'm a level 1 fat pincher.
And so what I'll do is we think we have this, human beings in our current culture generally have, and this wasn't always the case. Fat used to be something that we wanted, right? And so this fear of fat, this Jabba the Hutt, the Baron and Dune, like we do not like fat. And I'll always ask people, how much fat do you think a female bonobo has? How much fat do y'all think a female bonobo has? Just throw a number out there.
30%.
Sure.
3% in captivity. A female bonobo has 3% body fat. A male bonobo has 0% body fat. Fat is the coolest thing ever. We hit the lot. So I evolutionary stories, I like them. We found more food. We got better at processing energy, and we were able to store that energy as fat. It takes up 6 times less space than hydrated glycogen. Like, fat is so cool. It allows us to potentially live for 2 months without food. Like, fat is so awesome. And I think if we flip the switch on fat, if fat allows us to turn calories into babies, even when we don't have calories. Like, that is insane. That is insane. Like, Redmond's research in Pennington issue, it is like legitimately females being in energy deficits. It's gonna be really interesting to see how this works out, because you're in like the epigenetics and how this is transferred to the fetus. But it's mind blowing. So I just think that one of my favorite things that I ever wrote is fat is pretty cool. And it's allowed us to potentially take over the world. And if you are Caucasian, I think of fat as a buffer against metabolic disease. And once you've kind of passed your personal fat threshold, this is a personal fat threshold hypothesis, you're probably going to, once you start storing fat ectopically, viscerally, you're probably going to get in trouble metabolically. And it looks like if you went north, you may have a higher personal fat threshold before you get kind of metabolically dysregulated. And this is another reason that BMI is semi-useless, because it is the same across ethnicities. And so when we're talking about metabolic health, we have to talk about actual metabolic health and not body composition and BMI. Although they are correlated, it's the start of the discussion. It's not the end of the discussion.
It's certainly not the individual discussion, right? It might be useful if we talk epidemiologically, but when you are evaluating an individual, you've got it right there in front of you. Why use that metric when there are much, much better ones? That's for sure.
Yeah, the person in front of you can tell you what they hope to change and what they hope to achieve. And one thing, Ben and I had been, chatting about this a lot, and this is a conversation that I had with someone else who I think has really interesting ideas about obesity and metabolically healthy obesity. And it's something that I've kind of recently asked myself as well. What are we trying to do in answering that question? And of course, there's the pursuit of knowledge, and science itself. We can do it for the sake of itself. But what are we doing with that information? Some people might be using it, as Ben had pointed out, to, say that they're still at increased risk. And so people with obesity cannot be healthy. It's just chronically pathologized. If we're looking at a person with a high BMI, that's pathologizing that body size. And on the other side, we might hear that because metabolically healthy obesity exists, that we can't judge a person's health based on their appearance, which I think when we're thinking about all types of health, that's very true. But in that case, it can sometimes be sort of a trying to have a ticket to being acceptable. Hey, this person with obesity can also be healthy. And so that's okay, right? And it's maybe a really big ask to say that we don't necessarily have to try to prove whether a person is healthy or not, to just be kind and respectful to them. And that if they come to us for help, that we provide a high and consistent standard of care for them.
Well said.
You asked, that was amazing. You asked what to do. And I think why did I go on that diatribe about fat? The first thing I want to do is change the narrative. So we can talk about all these things, but if we don't change the narrative about body fat and why we're doing this, then I think we're having the same discussion that we've had before.
Right.
I agree. The motivation to even so when humans, I've observed this as a trainer, even when humans do what appears to be the same thing, when the motivations are different, the outcomes are impermanent and potentially harmful, or permanent and potentially positive. We see this with goal setting. Approach versus avoidance goals, when really we're looking at the same thing. I want to stop eating junk versus I want to eat more fruits and vegetables. The latter actually reduces the energy density of the diet and has positive health outcomes. The former doesn't do much of anything, but might make you feel pretty shitty, and I think there are so many versions of that we've talked about on Iron Culture, from people getting into physique sport because they hate the way they look, and then burning out or develop eating disorders, or getting into physique sport for literally any other reason that is more approach oriented. So I've seen it as a trainer. I've experienced it myself, and I know many others have. So I think 100%. We can't just look at the approach, because if you are taking look at it this way: if someone is doing the quote unquote evidence-based flexible dieting approach, and they want to have an evidence-based approach to unhating themselves, it's still not going to go well, So I totally agree that it does start with needing to view this whole thing from a different light, Ben.
And what Gabby said, this is all complex in the scientific space, in the group level. But the thing that I've worked on most over the last, I think, 10 years is can I change my face? Can I change the way that I look when I encounter everyone? When I meet anyone, can I have non-judgment, excitement, curiosity? It doesn't matter. I don't care who they are. Can I have that face? Because
that's the question every sociopath asks themselves, Ben. I'm so proud of you.
Which skin do I have to wear?
I'm not trying to be a chameleon or Dexter. This is perfect. I'm trying to really, and I've talked to psychologists about this, and I think it really does come into play with when you're using these behavior change, MI, things like that. Can you can you really, really maintain this posture and the disposition of inquisitive? This is we're learning together, and come from a place of non-judgment, because then that person's there. There's no power dynamic there. We're just going on this together. So for the coaches listening to this, we can be pragmatic. We can give you tools to use that could be better in certain circumstances. But on the individual level, I think we want to just be humans and just accept the person in front of us for where they are right now, and not add all of our shit into the mix.
This is going to sound woo, and it is, but I think it is actually a really useful self-talk to get into the right space. I try to think of being nurturing. Like, how do I embody a feeling of being nurturing? Like, I think of, how does a parent respond to a child who just fell? Sometimes they go, you shouldn't be clumsy, and they punch them in the face. But that's not the kind of parent I'm talking about. That's not a very nurturing parent, if you could think about that, right? And it's very easy to fall out of that, when you, and sometimes it's not even, like, I gave two extremes, like, child abuse and then a nurturing parent. But there's also something that is not that extreme, but it's neutral, but still doesn't have a positive outcome, or isn't quite nurturing, at least. And that's the fix-it mode, and that's something, by the way, if you ever want to piss off your partner when they want to share with you their problems, just tell them how to fix it immediately.
Everyone wants unwanted advice. Absolutely.
And if you ask my wife, when are the times she's thought about divorcing me? It's all the times I've tried to solve her problems for. I still make that mistake, even she's 16 years into marriage now. But the point is that it's not very compassionate. It's immediately going into like a do mode, and you're not listening to hear the person. You're listening to figure out how to solve a problem. And there may be a time and a place for that when it's from them, when they're driving it. But yeah, I think stepping into a space of, all right, I am trying to be nurturing now. What type of energy, emotional state, perspective do I step into to be like that for the person? And for me, I can't just change my face. I have to really kind of think about that. I have to, like, unlike Ben, I'm not Dexter. So I have to actually feel things instead of just creating this strange simulacrum of human emotion, and really try to.
I will say, as a psychopath, like you really what you want to do is you want to be able to perspective take. But if you look at the research, I would say empathy is not in your best interest. You do probably not want to be an empath. I mean, I don't want to feel what you feel, but I do want to be able to put myself in your shoes so that we can walk together. But if I actually feel your pain, that's probably going to cloud me emotionally. So I'm not going to be as objective or even able to do my job as well. And so.
Oh, and we've all had those friends, like you tell them something and they're crying, you're not anymore. And like you find yourself like you need to process their emotions because someone in your family died, and you're like, no, it's okay. And you're like, wait, what happened here? Like, no, that's not what you want in a practitioner who just melts in front of you every time you share anything with them.
Well, I think I'd like to clarify a little bit that what you're describing can certainly happen, and that's empathy distress. And that occurs when a practitioner has a really hard time differentiating their individuality. But when we look at the traits of effective practitioners on the therapeutic side, empathy is one of the most important factors. And it's not so much that you are in the emotion with that person in that time, but it's sort of this imagining how you might feel if you were in that situation. And empathizing with sort of the universal experience of emotions that people have, when they're not psychopaths.
Right. This is a tough area too, because like when you read the research here, there's not a whole lot of consensus on terminology. When you look at sympathy, empathy, compassion, and whether it is intentional or just automatic, anyway. But yeah, I was probably just saying things you were going to say anyway. But yeah, it's a tough area. It's easy to talk across one another when we talk about empathy. Right,
exactly. But I agree that, we have to be humans with each other and to collaborate. So like the spirit of MI, that, the partnership, acceptance, and acceptance is about, respecting their autonomy and accepting them where they are right now. And the compassion, working on trying to alleviate the suffering that they've expressed to you, and then empathy, just relating to that they're what they've experienced in an emotional way. But it's really about like helping to create an environment that's conducive to change, which means that there has to be very low shame. There has to be an atmosphere of two-way communication and understanding and trust and respect. And I really, looking at that and that's really what the evidence suggests as sort of like best practices for helping people change, creating a safe environment. What we see on social media is like the opposite of that. It's like shame people into change, make them feel bad about themselves, and then they'll want to do something about it. And, that might help for certain behaviors, for hiding or extinguishing certain behaviors. But we're trying to help people establish new behaviors. And that means, that the challenging the weight stigma. And Ben, I love the idea of like reframing body fat and, look at like all of the things that it does for us. It's super functional, and that maybe some of us have higher body fat thresholds than others. And so we're not going to walk around and live a reasonable life with a six pack and cut quads. We might have a soft stomach. We might have cellulite. We're very likely going to, because about 98% of women do, regardless of body fat level. But it's like that is, at the beginning you were talking about like we don't value like maintenance. We don't value, the prevention of developing a disease. And in the same way, people don't seem to value like maintaining their current body in its good, like in its healthy state with a reasonable social life and whatnot. It's like, that's not good enough. If you have just this extraneous body fat, you need to get rid of that.
And you've talked about this a lot too, is like acceptance doesn't mean accepting your body for where it is now does not mean that you can't have goals. It doesn't mean anything. It's just, I accept where I am right now. And Omar, you've talked about this in Your Mother's Love a lot. It's like just feeling worthy in your skin right now is really, really, I think it's important in this moment. And I think it's also important for those other moments in the future too. And that's something that is a fake dichotomy, and that people in, I would say, normally right of center will use as, oh, if I accept myself, then I'm never going to want to change. And that's just nonsensical. These are you can work on body image and body composition at the same time. And in fact, I think that's probably a really good idea.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sometimes people will come to, especially like, I think, if you're working in sort of the middle, I hear from a lot of clients, they want to, they don't want to stop trying to lose weight. They want to, lose weight. And they also want to like fix their relationship with food and change their body image and whatnot. And those things are challenging to do altogether. And sometimes they're not compatible. But sometimes what happens is that a person, is pursuing those at the same time, and they realize of their own accord, because, I can explain it to them. Here's the risk factors and whatnot. This might make it more challenging. Here's the safest way we can go about it. But usually they realize like, hey, my losing body weight didn't improve my body image. These are two separate things that I have to do. And I didn't even realize that I had so much body dissatisfaction. I actually want to focus on that first. And then like, the other stuff will happen later, or maybe, they change their minds. But it's like realizing that, yes, you can do those at the same time, and that it's very important to have concurrent body image support and working on body image flexibility if a person is pursuing intentional weight loss. And that like we can also do them separately, and that works too, because one doesn't guarantee the other. It's like having, I think, more and statements instead of or.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, Gabby. And I would even say that it among athletes or people who are heavily identified with like the kind of the fitness lifestyle, they struggle with that and I think they do find themselves in that or situation. And Ben, I think it's even more apolitical when we talk about like, bodybuilding, sport, and athletes. Like, how often do you hear the never be satisfied thing? That's just a universal trope in sport. Yeah, I'm happy we won, but I'm not satisfied. There's actually been research on this, and I reviewed some of it for Mass, looking at self-compassion. And there is among some athletes a fear of self-compassion, because if they feel like they are compassionate towards themselves, that therefore they won't have a motivation to improve, that they need to be dissatisfied with where they are to have a drive to get better. Interestingly enough, having more fear of self-compassion does not predict competing at a higher level, though, which is the outcome of that review in Mass. And this links into something else that I reviewed in Mass. By the way, you can subscribe to. I'm just kidding. I just find myself talking a lot about Mass, but I've delved into this research a little bit. Among athletes, there is this. When we talk about perfectionism, there are two very different flavors of it. There is this striving for excellence and trying to better yourself, and there's also the motivation to be perfect because you don't like where you're at, and motivated by the fear of falling short of it. And they can manifest very similar behaviors, but they also have other outcomes. The latter tends to have much higher levels of stress, poor performance, higher levels of burnout and overtraining, because you're always going for this. Again, it comes back to the approach versus avoidance-oriented goals, and doing things out of a motivation of dissatisfaction with who you are. And both can occur at the highest level in sport. But I would say probably the latter is far less adaptive. And if you want to have a longer career in sport, if you don't want to burn out, whether that's bodybuilding or just loving fitness, you really do have to make sure that you're not, got that fuel that's burning up the gas tank at the same time.
Yeah, that self-compassion literature is expands to other areas too. And even with looking at weight loss and weight loss maintenance, applying self-compassion in concert with self-monitoring. So if a person has a plan to, eat X number of calories and then they don't adhere to that plan, practicing self-compassion is probably going to be more beneficial than self-criticism. And also, yeah, exactly, just self-flagellate a little bit, and you'll stick to it next time.
Absolutely.
And focusing more on an analysis of, why did that happen? What might I be able to do better or do differently next time, rather than the adherence. I didn't stick to this 100%. We talk so much about adherence and trying to help clients adhere, and not quite as much about the analysis of what went awry, and the analysis perspective is probably more helpful because it can lead to less shame and also less self-deception. So a person, who is analyzing instead of focusing on adherence is less likely to just not track something. And then if they're practicing self-compassion, that's a way for them to show themselves some kindness and understanding, and, potentially, practice that acceptance. Acceptance is just acknowledging the reality of the situation. It's not, it's not avoiding, it's not resigning. It's just one example that I thought was so cool. I was working with someone who acknowledged that, they weren't tidying a lot. And so they were like, I'm not super tidy. And that seems to be affecting my household. And so I'm going to start, tidying things up, rather than criticizing themselves or sort of avoiding the reality of the situation. They didn't have to self-flagellate. They didn't have to criticize themselves. It was just an observation, and then deciding to make a change. And that probably, even if we say that self-criticism and self-compassion are equally effective for inspiring change, even though probably not. If one has less risk than the other, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and choose that. But it can be very difficult for people to implement self-compassion, because quite often they first have to challenge their beliefs about the utility and importance of self-criticism. And that's its whole process. And then it's okay, maybe I can get on board this self-compassion train.
I don't know. I learned from the documentary Dodgeball, A True Underdog Story, that probably the best way to prevent yourself from eating bad foods, which is an objective term, by the way, is to set a donut in front of yourself, hook both your nipples up to a electric shock thing, and then when you're about to take a bite of the donut, shock away. I don't know, Omar, if you've seen that, but I think that's probably. I mean, I haven't used it yet in my practice, but I have very few, like reservations about doing so personally.
No, I'm a regular practitioner of that. You just place it on your two taut nipples and then away you go. I am livid though, Eric, if I could be perfectly transparent here, because
you sound livid.
Thank you. Well, I'm holding back the anger. Because for those unaware, they muted my mic for the first hour. And that is because I was unaware that our two guests were woke leftists. And this radical Marxist ideology that they're trying to espouse here, where they're trying to get wooey about language, trying to change definitions. Let me just clarify a few things, folks.
Cultural Marxism, really. If you will.
Cultural Marxism. Obesity is bad. I'm willing to say it. That I read Ben. I don't know if you have any comment on this, but I saw something on social media that just really rang true to me. It's like this inner truth, poor people. What is it? They're inherently. I'll just say it once again. They're inherently more lazy. They make worse food choices because they just don't know any better. And rich people actually work harder and work longer, and they have less time. So I really, good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. That's just the way the world is. And this whole conversation really seems like one giant excuse. That's the first thing I want to say, Eric. I don't know if you wanted to comment on that before I go on.
Well, I mean, I don't want people to look this up because it might be false. But I'm pretty sure most people right of center are not obese. And if you look at the red states, they generally have much lower rates of obesity than anywhere else. So if this isn't easily solved by left and right politics, like most things in America, that's the source of all our solutions, not our problems, then I don't know what is, personally.
Now, I will say, to be serious for 1 second, I do have a genuine question. Because I think you guys, I've just been listening. Ben and Gabby, I think you've been crushing it. I think you're essentially playing like fourth dimensional chess, and some people are still playing checkers. And what I mean when I say that, there is this, help me, Gabby, bridge this gap.
Star Trek, sorry.
Star Trek. Oh, no.
I almost got canceled by the cultists. I'm sorry.
No.
I already got
Star Trek.
the wrong name of
Drago.
The Rocky Four.
Ivan Drago, yeah.
Oh, I know. I called him Vlad, which is...
That's fine. It's probably his middle name.
Man, that's bad.
That's offensive to like everyone from Central Europe eastward, so I apologize. Yeah.
Look, and for those accusing us, once again, just before I ask Gabby and Ben this question, of like not simping hard enough for capitalism, I mean, Ben recently got a sponsorship by Rogue, so we just got to shout that out. I mean, he's flushed with that cash. If you're on that video, you could see it, but I mean, we're willing to accept money here.
He's in the Rogue studio, folks.
He's in the Rogue studio, the Rogue mansion, the Rogue underground palace. Okay, underneath, it's in a cave, of course. So, it also acts as a bomb shelter. But I was gonna say, the question I genuinely have for both of you, because I'm listening to this, and there are some things. When it first struck me, would probably be 2013. Some of the intuition. Where I remember someone who was in shape, and these are some of the dirty lies that like kind of the fitness industry wouldn't own up to about certain aspects. There's someone that, to use Eric's word, ostensibly very in shape, looked amazing, was going to appear in one of my videos, shirtless. I'm talking single-digit body fat percentage points, uncomfortable because he was used to being at a lower percentage, and he actually had what I would describe as an emotional breakdown because we agreed 2 months before, and like this is like I'm keeping the anonymity of this person. But I'm like, there is definitely like something largely wrong here. Even what Eric alluded to, like there's elements of truth to a lot of the satire that we put out here where Eric said the smile, but there's the DBE I called the dead behind the eyes, just like glare where you see the person is fundamentally unhappy. My question for both of you, when we have these conversations and we talk about, approaching these things from a different place for coaches, is where would they start? Because on the social media landscape, I think within our own silo here on Iron Culture, we can have this conversation and people can kind of understand it and they could accept it in good faith. So we don't, there's not this preamble we need to go over. Like there's 20, 30 minutes of challenging some common conventions that are just accepted norms. But I think when we get outside of the silo, my question for both of you, when either communicating or for coaches, what are some of the top considerations for them when they're participating in this space that kind of is conducive towards using certain language in particular ways and like emphasis, and even from a marketing or algorithmic standpoint, right? There's incentives once again where you said like the before and after. I run ads now for my boy Ben is wearing that Rascal Apparel, the RP6 shirts. I've seen different ad sets and how things perform, and there's reward mechanisms inside of it. So one, there's a financial incentive. So it's hard for people to disengage with active mechanisms. To Eric's point outside where before this, we were talking about like social media and the algorithm changing with Instagram. There's financial incentives. There's also the cultural understanding of the fitness industry. And so you're essentially challenging certain norms. Like where does someone, I think I just want to ask this question because maybe the people that listen to the call could also help other people. And there's some people that are just coming into here. Where did they start? Because we're talking here and I'm listening to, and I'm loving it. It's feeding this little soul right here. Where do we start? Like, what does that conversation look like?
Like how like what if we're not helping people yo-yo diet, what are we really helping them with?
Yeah.
I think it starts the exact same way. It's everything that Gabby does with someone with obesity. Let's just go on a journey together. I don't care. Like if I said, like, I don't have the idea that this podcast is going to change how V-Shred markets. I have no idea. I don't think that's going to happen. We're an hour in. I can be real right now. Like I can be real. Like that person is tied to an identity that is tied to a financial complex that is tied. Like, I don't think I'm going to break that. But what I think this podcast can do is I think that it can move people out of the extremes. It can, all right, let's come to the center and let's talk about so progressivism. You mentioned politics, and I think that's good. But what's the problem with anti-diet culture is they're unwilling to talk about when it may not work. Like it becomes a religion. And that is the problem of the left, is we're not willing to talk about what is the downsides of this thing that we love. And then, because then all of a sudden you're an out-group member, and I'm very objective. So I don't care. I'll pick apart anything that I love, like, because I think that it's really, really important to do so. And I think Eric, you talked about bodybuilding, and we've been talking about the diet and the anti-diet a lot. We haven't necessarily talked about the word culture a lot. And it makes complete sense to me that the fitness culture is struggling to loosen. So like, if you think about Michelle Galfond, she talks about tight and loose cultures, and the bodybuilding and nutrition and fitness in general is very, very tight. It's rigid, and anti-diet comes in here and they're like, okay, let's loosen this thing up. Even, I mean, remember when flexible dieting was the worst thing ever? And so I just think it's going to take time. Like now flexible dieting is kind of like, you can eat rice cakes, or you can eat something and still change your body comp. Like, and so I think it's just going to take longer periods of time where we have better conversations. And in the meantime, we just have to be patient. Okay, you haven't heard of this yet? You haven't heard of these different types of terms? Let's talk about it. And then we, as Gabby said, like, you take the shame and the blame out of it. Okay, this is what this term means. And Eric, we've talked about this. I screwed up intuitive eating so many times. I was like, I'm gonna intuitively eat cupcakes. People will be like, I can't believe you just said that on a podcast. I said that in real life. It's on film. I said that. Like, I'll step on a landmine right here. I stepped on a landmine earlier when I said empathy wasn't, and then people are like, let's talk about it. Let's talk about when we make mistakes. Why did I say empathy was related? If you look at sales, empathy is generally non-predictive of sales and influencing. You want to be able to, like, what do you want? You want to be able to perspective take and then place yourself as an authority figure. That's what you want. Empathy is probably in your way. I want to be able to see your problem. I want to be able to feel your problem. And then I want to be able to spin it. And I want to be able to show myself as the person who has the golden ticket. And so if you're listening to this, could you use V-Shred marketing tactics to make a lot of money? Yeah, maybe. Maybe you could do that. But how are you going to feel at the end? I have no idea. Maybe you'll be happy in your Lamborghini. I don't know. But I think that if you're listening to this, you probably care most about the craft. And that's what I care about. I care about doing a better job and helping people. And it doesn't matter where they are on the spectrum. if they're my neighbor in North Carolina and they tell me like everyone with obesity is lazy, I'm going to try to maintain that same look on my face of inquisitiveness. And I'm going to try to maintain that same face of not.
Ben, in that case, though, because they shame people, the way you make them change is you shame them. That's when shame does work, though, right?
Reshame the shame.
Correct. Because I've learned that the problem with society is that certain people get shamed. And the way we change society is shame-based change, right?
Yeah.
Shame the shamers.
And there's no issue with that I can think of.
I just shame V-Shred. Like,
That's okay, though.
There's some people too far gone. He's a psychopath. He's in that rarefied category of Dexter.
Yeah.
Dr. Ben House.
Maybe we're friends. Maybe I'm on the wrong podcast.
You just had a different code of Harry. Don't worry.
No, I think there's like it in like the narrative space. I think the narratives are important, right? I think this is important, like showing this story, like, and then because a lot of times when we're arguing with people, even when I'm arguing with people on social media, the only reason that I will do it is not for, I don't have any attachment to changing that person's mind. The only reason I'm doing it is for people that are watching. Because I think that the majority here is probably silent, and we may be able to, like, the extremes is a really annoying conversation. And I don't necessarily know that we can move the extremes, but on social media and even in our real lives, like I think about my daughter, she's always watching, right? She's always picking up these little cues. How, like, what is she picking up? And so I'm arguing for the people that haven't decided yet. And that's really what's important to me about this whole debate, is because in our lives, if you are in the fitness space, you are going to meet people that have fat is bad, obesity is laziness. Let's not talk about SES. Let's not talk about adversity. Let's just, like, it's just bad. And I don't know that we move that person, but fighting with them probably is just going to deeper embed them in that state.
Yeah, that is it's human nature to be contrarian. That's why, like, we can't talk people into change. You tell a person, it's like, maybe that's why unsolicited advice, even if it would be helpful and it's something that we would implement, when we haven't asked for it, when we're not ready for it just challenges our autonomy. And especially when we're talking to other practitioners in the field and we are presenting the possibility that maybe they have done harm and maybe there are subjectively better ways of doing what they're doing, that we're now challenging, like, their identity, as a coach, as an effective practitioner in the field. And we're asking them to, in some cases, really rethink their entire philosophy and narratives about, what they believe about the world and how people are in it. And that's a lot to ask of a person, especially on Instagram. So what I've tried to do, and this was really, that was the impetus for that first article on intuition and training and eating, was not necessarily to say, like, you're wrong, I'm going to change your mind. I really wanted to say, hey, this thing that you think is nonsense woo-woo is actually kind of similar to this other thing that you use, this interoceptive awareness. You use it to, rate how challenging that set felt. You can also use that to sense how full or how hungry you are, and to try and, bridge the gap. Say, like, can we look at what we actually have in common? Can we stop trying to talk at each other or change our minds, but to say, I can see where you're coming from, and this is what I think. And this is what I've seen in the literature. And what have your experiences been? And to marry, this is why I made a new, I don't know, like a catchphrase or a slogan or whatever, science fortified with compassion, because we can weaponize science. We can weaponize this information and use it to punish people, or shame them, or we can try to find out, like, how it can be helpful and, look for those common areas and try to maintain, like you always say, Eric, that charitable perspective. Like, we're all, not all, a lot of us are probably trying to help, and we probably have good intentions. Right. It's like everyone, Omar, clearly. But it's like, we have good intentions and we want to be able to help people. And maybe we don't know the best way of being helpful. And, but we can like start there rather than saying like this other group, like they're so stupid. These people are awful. They're, like you're the cause of people's eating disorders. I mean, it really can be vitriolic. And I've received messages of people that were really angry. And like in the very beginning, I did take it personally because I thought like, oh, I am my thoughts. And so they hate me. And now I've realized, we have different perspectives. And so I can understand why people might make assumptions about me and what I do and why they might think I'm wrong. And they can have that opinion. That's okay. I'm still doing what I believe and hope to be best based on the evidence and based on experiences with people, with my clients. That is really like my litmus test. If I am implementing something, that it's going to be based on best practices in some paper at some point, or, a certification that I have. And then if that person seems to flourish as a result, not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily have to be weight loss. It can be, their relationship with food. It can be that they feel more connected with their partner or that they have less stress, whatever it is, that they've experienced some improvement. Not that I'm taking credit for that, but that the way that I have helped to facilitate that change was effective for them. Then that tells me, okay, I'm really helping people and it doesn't look like doing any harm. That's my sort of like a grassroots, like that's how I'm trying to help people, is to look at, if a person does want to do something that's potentially risky, how can I mitigate the risk? And how can I imbue as much like safety of a safety net into that approach? And can I also help them identify when something might be a problem for them? A lot of people, especially in this sphere, who have disordered eating habits or an eating disorder, they don't actually identify that. They haven't identified that like something could be problematic. And then, and then to help them if they have a weight neutral goal. So by changing the way that we can perceive ourselves, like in our role, that's one way that we can potentially detach from the outcome of weight loss, from a specific tool or a specific way of eating, and say, I can help people decide what they want to do and I can help them do it. And that doesn't necessarily have to be weight loss. It doesn't have to be physique. And it doesn't have to be weight neutral either. And on a zoomed out perspective in terms of, how we might be able to help change the industry, I think it is about, having those conversations with a purpose of understanding and trying to empathize with a person's emotions, even if we don't agree with their ideas, and, to try to be like kind in the discussion. And if that's not returned, that's okay. We can still have boundaries and say, you seem like you're really upset about this. And like, I'd love to have this conversation with you, in a different format maybe. And then, don't like expend extraneous amounts of time and energy trying to change their mind. But, part of this is like society and its beliefs about body fat and weight regain and how much that sells. So if you're trying to market something different, you're trying to market without using before and after photos, if you're trying to market a weight neutral approach, you're going to have to get creative. And I will say, like, totally transparent, I don't know anything about marketing. I really don't use a lot of marketing. Like, I've got my list at the end of my Instagram post and say, here's what I do. And I don't use, transformation photos. I did way back in the day for people who I helped with like bloating. But it's just something that I phased out because I was like, this doesn't really seem to be helpful. And it's not really what I want to show people that I'm helping with. So instead I put up people's testimonials or, their messages about how things have actually changed for them. I don't like whether their body changes or not, but like helping them really change their lives. That's fantastic. And I'm not in it to like, make a bunch of money or, get return customers that keep like regaining the weight and then coming back for help losing it. I really am here to help people in a more meaningful way. And if that means that I like make less money at the end of the day or whatever, I really like, I don't know. I don't care about that part. Like, I need to just make enough to like support myself. And I've been able to reimagine like my role as a helper. And I don't feel any less relevant Other people might disagree with that, but on the contrary, I actually do feel more on a personal level, just more fulfilled by the way that I'm helping people now. And I still, have awesome opportunities to speak about it, like this podcast. And, and it's something that I just am passionate about and I can write about, and it's enjoyable. So maybe there's an opportunity there to say hey, I'm not irrelevant if I'm not helping people lose weight, or I'm not, giving them macros. Cause guess what? AI is taking that over anyway. Macro factor, so if you want to stay relevant, it probably behooves you to gain a greater understanding and awareness of all the ways that you can help people and practice with those, and, reframe yourself as not so, not so attached to your ego and identity as the fixer and the provider of results. Because guess what? If a person doesn't achieve those results and you are trying to sell results, then you might not have a satisfying coaching relationship. But if you're I'm going to provide you with an experience, we're going to collaborate and go on this journey together, and it could end up in a surprising way, then you can provide them that experience.
Gabby, just spitting fire and also exposing some of your ignorance. For one, if you want to be an authoritarian coach who does fuel your ego based on fixing, it's very simple, because all outcomes are marketable. When people don't get success, you shame them and blame it on them. And when they do get success, you take credit for it. So it's really a win-win. But no, on a much more serious note, it does seem to me that, that first step that you talked about, Ben, of needing to change the narrative, really that you both talked about, is a challenging thing to do, because the first interaction point is going to be your marketing before someone becomes a client or a consumer of content. And that's a big ask to begin the wheels turning of changing a narrative from that level of exposure. I almost think the best thing you can do is just make them aware that there's another way. And actually, you see that in a lot of the marketing that I actually hate, doctors hate them, or one weird trick. They know that you're stuck, that what you're doing isn't working. And this is totally counterculture. You need to take the red pill, So I think, I don't know if you're going to, obviously you wouldn't take too much of that to do what you're doing. But I think what you have done is pretty effective, whether you know about marketing or not, in some ways, where you, what started this whole podcast was, hey, have you thought about this from an odds ratio perspective? If you do this wrong, the thing that you're not even thinking might occur is more likely to occur than the thing you're trying to achieve. And I definitely think if someone is exposed to that, that's definitely a no shit moment, and makes them dive deeper. So there may be some natural sociopathic marketing in you, Gabby. So don't despair. You might be able to hang out with Dexter and Ben in the future. Okay?
I'm going to have to get a spare face. I'm going to have to go collect something.
I love it. I love how, I was making the joke just about putting on a face without actually feeling things. Gabby went to actually cutting off someone else's face and wearing it. So you guys can definitely hang out.
How does that feel?
Call up Danny Lennon. Call up Danny. He's down.
Yeah.
He can be the face provider. No BYOF. He'll bring him.
Yeah, see, I survived an hour in a closet with him. So who's really the serial killer here?
It sounds like you guys just shared stories and became best buds.
You
thought it was going to be a scene out of a serial killer movie. It actually became a scene out of Step Brothers. Did we just become best friends? Yeah.
Eric, I found it incredible that Gabby literally admitted she's a Marxist, where you indicated that, if I don't maximize my own personal wealth, it's no big deal. When we know the sole function of an individual in an economic society is to maximize personal wealth, that shows how we can extend the proverbial olive branch on iron culture. Just because we're at the top of the pyramid, and Ben, for some inane reason, admitted in quotations that he was wrong with some of the language he used, he should learn from us, where we're never wrong. We're atop the pyramid. It's a little top-down hierarchy. Anything that they say, we correct them. And that's just, it's like a difference in, I guess, what you said, perspective, if I understood that correctly.
You don't need to do motivational interviewing when you are the objective truth. You just need to let people know what they're feeling and what their truth should be. So
Just let them follow you. You just
Correct.
permit them.
Permit them.
yeah, I fully support motivational interviewing for fallible humans who don't actually have access to the objective truth, where they have to understand one another's subjectivity. But honestly,
you're giving a lot of competency and resources by allowing them to follow you. Like they're learning a lot by watching your footsteps come down.
honestly, it's the close. I mean, giving someone a taste of the truth and light is really the best you can do when they're an immortal vessel. So, but that's not a sustainable strategy. We have to give tools to everyone else besides Omar and I, which is why we have the podcast.
Right.
There's only 2 anointed, so we can't just anoint everybody. That's not.
Yeah.
I mean, we could if we wanted to.
That's not how oligarchy works.
Correct.
Yeah.
Then
everyone would have power.
That's a Ponzi scheme. This is not, I didn't sign up for the MLM. When's the MLM?
Not that kind of pyramid. No.
Yeah. I do, Eric. I have one follow-up. I'm not sure how far we want to get into this, but I thought that was a lovely answer by both of you. I think the question. Oh, we're going deep with this episode.
They're trying to get off the podcast. We're trying to start part 2.
We're just going to turn this in. You know, when podcasts sell out, they do like a shitty 10-part series, so it's only 20 minutes each, but just to rack up the views to once again appease the algorithm. My question was going to be then related on a population level then, because a lot of what, as far as I'm understanding it, that Gabby, you said, and Ben, there is so much value for any individual to work with either a qualified coach or begin to understand their own journey. And a lot of that can be assisted with someone that could guide them on that. But where does someone, or where does the population as a whole start when we talk about some of these interventions or some of the potential paradigm shifts that need to occur? Because both of you are phenomenal resources, like Gabby, the blog post, Ben, what you put out, the research reviews. And these are kind of like the ladders coming down that people can understand. And then coaching is that one-on-one way for someone where you brought up the example, for instance, like macro counting, where for some people it might be useful, for some people it might not be useful. And that's something on an individual level they have to discover for themselves. Now, if we kind of then zoom out on a wider population level, what do some of the most important interventions look like? Or what are some of the key conversations that need to be had? Because we spoke now to the coaches. We spoke to the people that are adjacent to the coaches that we're referring to. And now we're kind of like zooming all the way out maybe at the problem. Because I think inside the cult, we're sipping that Kool-Aid because that's what a cult does. And now we're just like outside of it. Like, what does that conversation look like?
Oh, I was just gonna make a joke. Please, you're gonna say something serious.
No, go, Gavin. I got to hear the joke.
Jokes are more important.
It was just gonna be like, oh, so the internet's like wrong, that people are just like inherently lazy and don't care. That was gonna be my answer.
Oh my God. Yeah, pretty much.
The thing that I always come back to in this is how can I extend an olive branch to this coach who really wants weight loss, who loves weight loss? How can I, because I think that if we're going to bring people together, we want to bring them together over a common goal. Like that's what brings people together. And so if you love weight loss, okay, how can I love weight loss? How can I'm going to eventually talk about the downsides, but how can let's talk about the upsides of it. And I think if you look at a great last name of a paper, Lean, from the Direct study, even you got Adrian Brown's work in type 2 diabetics. And if you look for populations where weight loss will ostensibly increase quality of life significantly, we are talking about type 2 diabetes and then also osteoarthritis in the knees, maybe low back pain, maybe plantar fasciitis and foot pain, things like that, where weight loss will likely lead to increases in metabolic health, very, very, very likely, and possibly off a lot of medications, and these people will feel better. So I think then you get into how durable is it? Is it going to last? And we will have the Direct study. Those 5-year outcomes are going to come out. The 2-year outcomes just came out and they're pretty solid. If you maintained 15 kilos of weight loss, at 1 year, you had an 86% shot of being in remission from type 2 diabetes, which is a really, really, really big deal. Because in the early 2000s, people were thought type 2 diabetes was for life. And we got to be very careful with, again, the people on the right are going to get mad that I'm being very careful with my language here, but you want to say remission because and this comes with weight loss is very difficult to maintain. That's why we use the word remission and not other words. And so that's a population that can really, really benefit from weight loss. And then with prediabetes and that population, you could be looking like just maintaining 5% weight loss could reduce progression of type 2 diabetes by 90%. But I would make the argument from other literature that it could reduce the risk of, so on average, people who are pre-diabetic will annually progress to type 2 diabetes at a 5 to 10% rate. And if you look at even weight loss that is quote unquote unsuccessful, so they lost 10% and then they regained a 5%, you're looking at about a 1% per year progression to type 2 diabetes from prediabetes. That's monumental, like the difference there. And then we have a few Hayes studies that show similar things over 2-year periods. And so even if you're ineffective long-term at that weight loss, what are the skills that you gave these individuals? That's always what I'm thinking about. When this person graduates from working with me, or they graduate, it doesn't necessarily mean, maybe they're not even working with me in person, but they take my program, they buy this course or whatever. What skills are they going to have at the end of that they didn't have at the start? Because that's what I care about most. I care about the processes and their competencies and their resources. I don't necessarily care about the outcomes that they got, because those may or may not be durable. And we may need to stop thinking about weight loss as this thing that's like set it and forget it in our current obesity epidemic. Like you might have to go back and get you some more. And then what is the downside of that? And then you get in the downside of weight cycling. Like, so is weight cycling inherently bad if someone doesn't lose muscle mass? Is weight cycling inherently bad if they don't have the psychological negatives, if they have these tools? Oh, I'm just doing this again because it's for my health. That's really understanding the downsides and the upsides of the tools and who it can help, versus, hey, you don't have a six-pack, you gotta lose some pounds. Some LBs need to come off if you want to be healthy. And so those are
it's almost yo-yo dieting without all the negative connotation of yo-yo dieting. Going, I'm gonna drop some body fat in a healthy way for health, and then I have a high probability of potentially regaining it because that's kind of what my body seems to do, and I'll repeatedly do that every couple years so that I don't progress towards diabetes. And it's okay if I regain it. That's just what I need to do.
Yeah. And if you have resistance training and physical activity, which I would argue are the most important variables in the thing that we all can get behind, especially self-efficacy and a movement practice that you love, I think it does clear a lot of the negatives of weight cycling. The only negatives then I'm worried about are shame, blame, psychological. But if we can be objective and think of these as tools, I am lowering my area under the curve from a metabolic health perspective. I think that's something that we can get behind, because chronic disease is, the common denominator is time. It's anything over time. Like if you think about cardiovascular disease risk, it's high blood glucose, it's high inflammation, it's high blood lipids over time. And so if we can reduce those things for 5 years, we probably just lowered your risk overall. Even if it goes back up after that. And so that's, I think, is a really, really important point, is that the odds, and Gabby, you shared this, the odds that you're going to go from obese, let's just talk about actual numbers here. Because when people share those astronomical before and afters, like 360 pounds at 200, I'm like, I'd bet the farm that person looks red S. Relative energy deficiency in sport. I would bet the farm like 360 to 200. I'd bet the farm that your hormonal axes are whacked out. There's going to be individuals that's not the case, but I would bet pretty heavily that from a relative perspective that had a cost. And the likelihood of even doing that is, I think, Gabby, like 1 in 200 or something, like 1 in 150. The odds are really, really low that someone's going to be able to do that. So we talked about marketing. Like, this is a spot where, like, your business principles, like, I'm going to swear here because we're deep, like, your business principles can go fuck off. Like, your big, hairy, audacious goals, like, yeah, stop it. Just stop. Like, pump the fucking brakes, bro. Your smart goals, like, yeah, assignable, yeah, just pump the brakes. Just pump the brakes. That's not to say, like, we do have research that obese individuals will probably set the bar a little bit lower than normal weight individuals when they start the process. But, and I messed up my words, so please I apologize. But that's not to say that we need to drop it to these crazy, insane before and afters. The direct study we're talking about, 15 kilos performed really, really well, and 10 kilos of weight loss for people who are obese and type 2 diabetic. 10 kilos, which is 22 pounds, that also performed fairly well. So you're talking about not hundreds of pounds. We're talking about 20 to 40 pounds, which is a lot different story than Biggest Loser.
I'll just segue, because I think that was pretty much the end of the beginning of what I was going to say about being transparent and what is going to be realistic for a person. But I also want to touch on, when we're talking about the population level and public health changes, we probably have to acknowledge that in these studies that are showing long-term maintenance, when it is sustained, that's usually because there was some support. They're working with a dietitian or something like that. And you had pointed out too that we don't have as solid of evidence about weight loss maintenance because they don't have long-term support in those follow-ups. And I actually think that that's probably more relevant to the reality. People aren't going to be able to afford a coach or the good version of an app or maybe a gym membership or, taking extra courses to increase their nutritional IQ. So if we're looking at the odds being between, I think it was 120, 1 in 120-ish for women and 1 in 200 for men, that a person with just simple obesity, grade 1 obesity, that they would attain a normal body weight. So 1 in 120 to 1 in 200. Those are very low odds. And maybe 1 in 5 people will even maintain their weight loss for upwards of 5 years, looking at 10% body weight loss or more. So we don't have great odds, but that's looking at a research environment, and that's looking at people who are in a group with other people who are doing the same thing and they're receiving a lot of support. I would venture to guess that maybe those odds are even lower, even less favorable when we're looking at people who have no support and their only resource is TikTok videos. They really they're doing what they think must work because look at this person in their 6-pack abs. And of course, people who have abs must know they're doing the right thing, so it is from a public health standpoint, we might have to try and determine what are maybe that's what we're trying to determine, the major contributing factors. And then are there ways that we can address all of these to help prevent people from developing whatever habits are in place that lead them to developing metabolic disease. And, and that can be, and even so one thing that I think people get confused about with HAES, with Health at Every Size, is that they think that it's claiming people can be healthy at every size and leave them alone because they could be healthy. But it's actually a social justice movement to increase access to resources that would support health and well-being. So that could be information, it could be exercise equipment for large bodies, it could be exercise clothing, it could be nutrient-dense foods, it could be challenging weight stigma in medical care. It's not saying everyone's healthy. It's saying if we focus solely on body weight or BMI, A, we don't get the full picture. And B, we're not giving people, like Ben pointed out, habits. We're not helping them to change their behavior. So if you go on their website and they have an FAQ that's well, are you saying that people who are 600 pounds or 90 pounds, are both healthy? And they say, no, we're saying that we're trying to figure out what it is that led them to this place that they're in now. And if they want to change that, how we can help them access resources that they need, especially when we're talking about people of lower SES, because they may have generational trauma. They may have, generational, just like the food habits passed down from one to the next. Where do you learn how to cook? Maybe from your parents, and like, what are they using to cook with? Things that their parents used to cook with. So what I think is a real shortcoming in the way that sort of health and fitness and nutrition and whatnot are marketed is that, by and large, like, it's like everyone is getting like bodybuilding style nutrition information, right? Nutrient timing and macros and all this stuff. Like, there are people that don't know how to cook things, and they don't know what foods have protein. And it probably isn't even necessary to get them, like we were talking about, to that macros level. But trying to reach a group of people that I think are largely neglected, because we often speak to a fitness audience, but there's not a lot of communication to a non-fitness audience. What about people who don't like to exercise? Helping them find, and like you said, movement. So reframing that so it's not about exercise and going to the gym. It's just, can we help you find a form of movement that you enjoy? Oh, and by the way, for us to help them do that, if they have grown up in a large body and have experienced weight stigma, guess what? The world is not the same place for them as it is for us who have grown up in normative bodies. It's like, like a lot of us are right-handed, right? Well, imagine like what it is to be left-handed, and then like, okay, see?
Let me tell you, Gabby, it's a nightmare.
Yes, exactly. Or like, people might not know this unless they've met me in person. I'm 5 feet tall, and there are a number of exercise machines that do not fit me. There's no way that I can effectively use those machines. So imagine living in a body for whom this world is not built. And then people are judging you for it. They're making you feel shame for, going out and trying to exercise. And you have even just the added limitations of like, just finding things that are in your size, things that are comfortable that you would be able to exercise in. So it's like realizing that there are a number of obstacles, and that and that in order to be able to help people and like address this, issue of public health, we have to realize that, like, yes, all of those metrics are important to know. And also we need to acknowledge the numerous barriers that people might have to the resources that would improve their health. And that's a big part of the social justice movement behind HAES, is to reduce the weight stigma or challenge the weight stigma and make this environment less, I don't know how to say it. I don't want to say like dangerous, but, more reasonable to exist in. And then also, helping people to meet their emotional and mental needs. Like if they've had a difficult time in life, and perhaps that's playing a role in their relationship with food. So like as important as it is to see like what's helpful for weight loss and weight loss maintenance, like, okay, physical activity every day, and, a general awareness of what you're eating and kind of eating the same on the weekends and the weekdays, that's great. Fruits and vegetables. I think probably a lot of people are aware of this, but they don't know how to help themselves get to that place. Like they don't know, like, how do I increase my fruit and veggie intake? How do I cook this food? Like, I don't like exercise. What else can I do? And like, how do I help myself not eat all of the cookies in the package? Like certainly we could say, their food environment. Well, what if we helped people to be able to better navigate the food environment so that they feel less stress around food and they can eat a couple of the cookies and put the rest of the package back? So it's like we can look at from sort of an inside out and an outside in perspective, that like the things that that need to change for people are largely like, sort of systematic and institutional in support of the individual changes that they want to make.
Spitting fire. Well said. Ben, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I'll jump in. And so I think we could all agree that there's a lot of things that are related to successful weight loss maintenance. I would make the big argument that physical activity and real food would be high on those lists. And I don't think many people would argue that, like having access to fruits and vegetables, having access to be able to walk. And so these people are like, why is this so complicated? It's sticky, it's super sticky. because we got food swamps. I grew up in a place where like playgrounds were not where you wanted to be after sunset. Like playgrounds were not safe. Like playgrounds were where people hung out and dealt drugs. Like legitimately, that's where I grew up.
Same.
And so, like, we have to understand that these, even if it is as simple as, okay, people need to move more, it's still not that simple at the societal level. And I think that's why these conversations are so important. And that's why I think it really is to think about this outside of what is really the stories that we hear for people who have maintained long-term weight loss. So if we use like Malcolm Gladwell's Success Leaves Clues, what do they say? They say, in general, if you look at the case studies, they say, I had to completely reinvent myself. I had to change my environment and I had to change who I was in order to do this, in order to have this transformation. That's a really, really big ask. And what I see by obviously my boy's fellow psychopath V-Shred and a lot of the marketing tools that Omar's talked about, what I see is you will do this, lose the weight, and then your life will be exactly the same. And that I think that is the cell that we need to kill. The cell that we like, if by doing this, by taking this path, you probably have to change the fabric of your life. You may even have to change who you are as an individual. Do you want to do that? This is what it looks like. Do you want to potentially ostracize your family because they might not change? Like, these are very real conversations that if you've been coaching for a long time, you've probably had with people, and they're really, really tough. And I do think that we need to honor that when someone goes on this path, and yes, I do think that for the majority of people, it will increase their health, but your life is very likely going to change. Positive or negative, it's going to change. And people do not like disruptions to homeostasis. They want to go back to how their world was. Whether that world was bad or good, we generally do not like change, and people like cyclical patterns. So you are not only are you asking people to potentially break their own cyclical patterns, you're asking people to break generational cyclical patterns. And that is a big ask. And so I think we need to, as practitioners, we need to be patient. We need to obviously be accepting. And we also need to start thinking of these things on a little bit longer time periods than what can you do in 4 weeks. I'm talking about what can you do now. So if you get pregnant and you have a child, so that child has a potential different experience than you had. Because my grandfather was an alcoholic who was abusive. No judgment in that statement. That was his reality. He was a Marine. The only reason he lived is because he hid under dead bodies on the 51st parallel. That was my father. That was my grandfather. He was an alcoholic. Died an alcoholic. My father was an alcoholic. I was born, and he was an alcoholic. He became not an alcoholic when I was 3 years old. Okay, there's 50 years. He broke the cycle. I was an alcoholic. When did I become sober? 28. So I hope that my daughter never has to deal with those addiction issues that I've had to deal with. And I'm not comparing obesity to alcoholism. Don't get it twisted. That's not what I'm doing here. What I'm saying is these are generations upon generations. So to think that you can fix everyone's problems in your 6-week weight loss program, whew. I hope you believe it. Because if you believe it, I'm sure people will buy it.
You heard it here, folks. 12-week transformations are the way to go.
They need a few more weeks.
Yeah. As Ben said, it needs to be a little bit longer from the way you're viewing things.
That's not to say that we don't try. That's not to say that we don't try and do hard things. My wife always says, we can do hard things. But it's just to say that, for these big, big problems that are really, really sticky, I think we, especially with prevention, you think about preventing a case of type 2 diabetes. What are we asking to do? We're asking to prevent a problem that never existed. That is a really, really hard thing for humans to do and to market. We like to, okay, this was a thing. I fixed this thing. Let me show you that I fixed it. Not, this was never a thing. Let me show you how we did something that prevented something that never happened. Like it's a completely different sell. And if you look at, like, I think it's really cool to look at crime. Like, what is the best way to lower crime? Arguably, it's helping low-income, impoverished pregnant women. It's giving them safe places to be. And so, like, you talk about generational level thinking. Like, how do you get there before? You get there before, not necessarily in the United States, but in the developing world, female education. How can we, and free access to birth control. So these are huge societal level issues, and people are obviously going to get mad at me from multiple different angles from that. But I think if we really do think about these problems as prevention, when you start thinking about prevention, you're not right next to the problem. You're trying to get rid of the problem in general before it even started.
I don't think anything you said is controversial when ultimately you're just saying to reduce the reward mechanisms for things that have yet to occur, rather than using punishment for the things that are occurring. And it doesn't mean you have to choose one or the other and that one's never effective, but like crime and punishment is an obvious one, right? You know, that if you don't have resources and you need them, you're probably going to take them, you know? But if you can get those resources there, you're removing a reward mechanism for taking them. Pretty straightforward, folks. So no, I think that can definitely be applied to what we're talking about here with public health. And if we have a more nuanced understanding of ways to pursue health, rather than it being very singular, like we've talked about this whole time, we got more options on the table. So I think you guys have given up a lot of your time, a lot of your expertise. However, I do want to make sure, and Omar tried to do this before. They didn't take the bait, Omar. You were like, hey, what things can people get access to? And they spoke more like, well, resources are important. And they went on a Omar was basically saying, hey, can you please market yourselves? That was a missed opportunity. Yep. Yeah. Well, share with the cult what stuff you've got on this topic.
I gave you the layup so you wouldn't feel like, you know, when you got to mention it yourself, you feel almost embarrassed, right, to mention your own resources. Like, here you go. Like, hey, tell me
you
about
passed them the ball, and then they went, see, balls are great because, you know, they're like, no, dunk it. Yeah. So
we waxed philosophical on that one.
So where can people find you guys and more information about all this topic? Because I know we really just scratched the surface as far as how much thinking you both have done on this topic.
Well, the initial launch pad of the articles and whatnot, and that, you know, led to my post, would be the first Bridging the Gap article. So if people go to btgcomprehensivecoaching.com, I believe that's what it is, or just Google comprehensive coaching, you can find those articles. And Shannon and I also put on a Bridging the Gap with Comprehensive Coaching webinar series. That's a 3-part series with a practical application session. And we also have a 2-part series and PA session on the spectrum of intentional eating, which is our conceptualization of sort of how we can help people determine which approach is best for them without favoriting or demonizing weight neutral versus weight focused approaches. And they can find me at Vitamin PhD on Instagram if they want to learn more, get some book recommendations. I've read many books that I don't necessarily agree with, but I wanted to do it so that I could see what people are talking about when they are making statements that I might not agree with. But that means that I have a lot of like both, you know, weight neutral, weight focused, and sort of like historical texts that I think can be helpful for people to just gain an understanding.
Love it. How about you, Dr. House?
I will say that if you had the leaning towards my like overly objective, putting things in boxes type of ideology, if you had like, ooh, I like it when he talks about that stuff, subscribe and buy Gabby's stuff.
Damn.
Because I think that is twist. Really, really, really important for you to get someone that is a little bit different from that type of perspective. So if you're a coach who loves tools and you want to put things in boxes like I do, go to where it's a little bit dirty and it's not as clear. And I mean that in the absolute best of ways. And because I think that people like me, we think that information is going to drive behavior change. I've thought for so long, if I just get a PhD and I have all the right information, then I'll be able to tell people the right things and they'll do what I say. No, it's not how it works. You have no power in someone else someone else is changing. You have no power. And if once you understand that, you can maybe have a shot at moving people towards change. So I'm at Deconstruct Nutrition, which is about dismantling distortion so we can kind of break things up and start to look at the parts. But if you're really wanting to get into the nitty gritty of the coaching aspect, Gabby, I loved your Bridging the Gap series. It was fantastic. It had so much usable stuff in there. So I hope people subscribe and I hope they buy it.
Bro, research. You heard it here first, Eric.
That's right. Yeah. Deconstruct. Yeah, that's all I heard. Now, this is amazing. Yeah. He's saying, folks, don't come to me to confirm your own biases. You can't change other people. And if you really want to change other people, talk to Danny Lennon. Because if they don't change, he locks them in a closet and they don't leave. So awesome. I just want to say huge thanks to both of you, Dr. Fundaro as well as Dr. House. We appreciate you coming on. Omar, anything you want to say in closing?
Two things, my man. The first would just be that I do understand to try and be in that position, because I was there as a trainer. I think we all were there, where you're kind of frustrated at the lack of outcome that you desire, because most people entering the personal training space do so with good intentions. And you almost have to reconcile with not your own ineptitude at the immensity of a problem, but also it's not about you, homie. Like you thinking you're always right. Or if people merely listen to me, where I think a lot of the fitness space, to me at least, Eric, myself, is disengaged a bit, just from the socials, myself too. It oftentimes now feels like observing an old man yelling at the clouds. We're like, if only they listen to this. And I do want to reiterate, because Ben House quoted you. And so I'm going to quote Ben House quoting you from an earlier episode, that sometimes identifying a problem is not the same as offering a solution, which I think is just like a golden nugget as we drop nuggets here, Eric, for people to unpack as coaches, trainers, individuals seeking to help other people. And then let's not get it twisted, because we have to appeal to the tonic that is iron culture, some good old-fashioned motivation. I'm going to draw upon my number one bodybuilding guru, who's The Rock, because of course Arnold, after the recent stuff that happened with Arnold, Terminator Genesis, which was just a bad film. Things happen. Anyways, so with The Rock, as we know, anyone that was lost or confused, I just want them to understand that it's about drive, it's about power. We stay hungry, we devour. Put in the work, put in the hours, and take what's ours. And I think he kind of neatly encapsulated everything. So I just want to shout out The Rock, who always remains rock hard in a funky place, and the cult too, for listening and making it all the way to another 2-hour just magnum opus of some phenomenal guests that we're linking, both of them. Oh yes, both of them. Dr. Ben House, Dr. Gabrielle Fundaro. And you could do your part by leaving a rating and review on iTunes, because we are waging that eternal war. Folks, I've tried to pitch Eric to so many different podcasts, and they said, sir, please stop sending nude images of this man. I said, you don't see what I see. And so anyways, we are fighting against, in the health and fitness space, Gabby, we're in the top 200 on iTunes, which is pretty cool. But out of the 200 in the health and fitness space, I would put forth that like maybe 20 actually deal specifically with like exercise, training, and nutrition. We got some like sexual health podcasts, which are cool, but like we're waging that war. We're trying to get that social currency. So go ahead and leave a rating review, and we'll catch you all back every single Monday. We'll see you in that next episode.